this is as bad as it gets. I just don't think it can really get much worse than it is. So many people truly believe that just because you're rich, you must be smart. It can't have been anything except your sheer brilliance and love of humanity that made you rich and famous. It was not legal what was done in 2008 in terms of the cooperation between the Fed and the Treasury, in terms of the bailouts being run through private corporations, right, who had no accountability to Congress, but yet the taxpayers ended up having to pay for that. And that's what happened in 2008 was that the government picked the winners and the losers, who they would bail out and who they wouldn't. Why did Lehman fold and not Merrill Lynch, for example? So they're picking winners and losers.
I'm here to tell you very, very quickly about how I am absolutely exploding my growth on YouTube. This tool is called Cast Magic. So, all you have to do is input your link to Cast Magic. It will give you a transcript of your entire podcast or YouTube show. It will give you all of the AI content you could ever imagine, including introductions, speaker bios, keywords, titles, timestamps, threads, promotional tweets, blog posts, and much, much more. You even get Magic Chat where people can treat your podcast like ChatGPT and ask questions about it. There's so much more. Cast Magic and use code CASTING30 to get 30% off. Okay, thank you. I hope that was fast. Enjoy the podcast. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined for the fourth time by Dr. Susanne Trimbath, author of Naked, Short and Greeny, Lessons Not Learned, and Decade of Armageddon, which I am currently reading. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to getting the a 5-time hosting jacket. That's like the jacket. SNL version. I get the Chatter version of the velvet jacket. Looking forward to that.
I'm making t-shirts, but maybe we could look at a jacket as well.
T-shirts are fine.
So your new book, A Decade of Armageddon, is, I think the best way to describe it, it's like a chronicling of the years between the absolute outset of the 2008 financial crash, over 10 years up to close to present day. And it's a really, really interesting to watch the reporting and the stories like develop as you yourself are watching things go on and developing. It's really interesting to watch the information that comes to light, like speculations that you had and like things then that seemed to be like, you were like, okay, well maybe this is going to happen, and then in some cases the actual result was far worse.
Yeah, worse than you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
And I have a vivid imagination that tends in the direction of not so pleasant and happy. It's the sewer version of everything. But.
Yeah. I mean, so I think a good place to start is you open the book talking about the AIG bailout. And I wanted to just read this paragraph because it is stunning on so many levels. So it says, the US Treasury and Federal Reserve paid $150 billion for an 80% stake in AIG in a bailout announced on September 16, 2008. On September 22nd, just days after receiving this bailout, AIG spent $443,000 on a spa outing at the luxurious St. Regis resort in Monarch Beach, California, including $23,000 in spa treatments. AIG visited the Hill on October 7th, 2008, where the CEO defended the spending as necessary to maintain business. How did we get to a state where there was this little oversight on the spending of billions of dollars?
You know, the way the senators put it, and this is all somewhere else, maybe later in the book, the way the senators put it was that Hank Paulson, who came from Goldman Sachs and was a Treasury Secretary at the time that all of this was started to happen, Tim Geithner came in shortly after, but that he went to Congress and he said, look, if you don't bail out these banks and brokers, there won't be a tomorrow. it'll just like the world will just collapse and that'll be the end of it. And they thought to themselves, they admitted this later, senators admitted this later, they thought to themselves, well, here's this guy who's so rich, spent so many years on Wall Street, is politically connected enough to be Secretary of the Treasury. Surely he knows what he's talking about. And so we have to believe him and just take him at his word without requiring any evidence or any proof or any explanation, and just start bailing out banks. And I think that's why there was no oversight. And some of these things started to come out, like the parties and the big events that AIG was throwing. And in fact, at some point, when questioned about why they would spend so much money on these conferences and luxurious hotels, the head of AIG at the time said, well, we wanted to retain our staff, so we had to keep them happy. And someone asked them, why retain them if they got you into this position where you're bankrupt? Like, it's not strangers from the outside who did this. It was your managers making decisions and your staff making decisions that bankrupted you. So that was their excuse for it. As those stories started to come out that that this spending was going on, I think at some point Congress just kind of had to slap their head and say, what we should never have taken Paulson at his word. We should not have just said, oh yeah, you must be right because you're so rich, you must be smart. This is the thing that gets me all the time, is that so many people truly believe that just because you're rich, you must be smart. It can't have been anything except your sheer brilliance and love of humanity that made you rich and famous. It's absurd. So what happened then is that because the federal government started handing out these bailouts, all of the I don't know if you remember Glass-Steagall, that we had the separation in the U.S. between banks and investment banks. Yeah. The banks weren't allowed to invest in stocks, and then that was all repealed, I think, in the Reagan era.
So I think it was actually Clinton that repealed Glass-Steagall, but I'll check that actually.
Yeah, I don't remember now. It's one of those horrible events in life that you try to flush away from your mind, like most of the 2000s have been. Anyway, so what happened was, so you had investment banks like Goldman Sachs who didn't do commercial banking and therefore were not members of the Federal Reserve System. They were governed just by the SEC. But because the Federal Reserve got involved with Treasury in rigging all of these bailouts, investment banks like Goldman Sachs changed their charter to become banks, just regular commercial banks. That way they would have access to all that bailout money. And it wasn't long after they got their bailout money and, the public forgot what happened, that they went back to becoming investment banks and gave up the commercial banking side.
Yeah. And like that bit where you were talking about, they just sort of, where Paulson went to Congress and was like, everything's going to end. You have to guarantee, you have to save the financial system. Reminds me of literally exactly what happened in Ireland. The government just agreed in the middle of the night, like on the verge of like banking collapse. They were like, we'll guarantee it all, with no idea what the bill was going to be. They were just like, it's okay, we'll pay for it.
It's such an insane thing to do. I mean, the whole point of having you want to have some guardrails around the system, right? So that if bad actors come in, it's possible to protect the public, the investing public. But those guardrails are limited for a reason, and that's so that you don't have this expectation of a bailout, which is the problem that we have in the U.S. right now. In fact, really, very few countries don't. There's a few, like Korea right now, South Korea, China is working on it. There's some countries that are really getting serious about, not giving this expectation that every time you fail, we'll step in and fix it. But we have this long history that creates what's called moral hazard in economics, and that's the idea that I, as a manager at a bank or a broker, can take as much risk as I want. I don't have to worry about any of the consequences because the government will bail it out. And we just have done this so many times. We just did it again with Silicon Valley Bank. They guaranteed not just what was covered by the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, but they guaranteed and covered every dime of every deposit by every investor, by every depositor, every customer in the bank. That's, like you say, like that, like you said, now, like no consequences. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. We don't care what how much it's going to cost it. We're just going to spend it all. It's an insane way to run a country.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to ask actually. This ties nicely in with these partners that Timothy Geithner made when he was at the New York Fed, I believe. Basically using like unregulated LLCs in order to like buy and sell assets like on behalf of the New York Fed outside of the system. So it feels like because of the lack of accountability, even when there are regulations in place that would say, okay, there's only so much money we can give you, they find a way to get around it.
Exactly. Absolutely. And this is leading into a topic that I'll be doing, doing some writing on, and intend to do some podcasts later on this month or maybe early August, this regulatory crisis. So what you have is this idea that at one point, at the initial point, all of these regulators say our regulations are sacred and we must stand by them, and the way that they're set is perfect and nothing should be changed. We'll tweak it here, we'll tweak it there, we'll make T+1 work. But there's another level of crisis and regulation where they say that, excuse me, what's happening right now is so extraordinary that we absolutely must break our own rules. Right now, all of a sudden, our regulations are meant to be broken because we have a situation in front of us that's totally extraordinary. And that's what they did in 2008, many times before that, and then again in Silicon Valley Bank. So the rules are that if the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation doesn't have enough money to cover the deposits, which Silicon Valley Bank, because they decided to cover everything, every deposit, they certainly didn't have enough money for that. The rule is that they're to go to the treasury to get more money, to get the money to cover that. Well, at that point in time, the U.S. Treasury was in fact trying to get their debt ceiling raised through Congress, who was not cooperating, because they had hit the limit of what they could borrow, and there just was no more wiggle room there. The deficit was high, the borrowing had topped out, and since the Treasury then didn't have money to give to the FDIC, rather than turning to Silicon Valley Bank depositors and saying, I'm sorry, these are the rules that we hold sacrosanct, that we all live by and cling to, they said, oh, let's just go to the Fed and get it from them. And that's what they did. And it was exactly what they did in 2008. They broke their own rules. It's honestly was not legal what was done in 2008 in terms of the cooperation between the Fed and the Treasury, in terms of the bailouts being run through private corporations, right, who had no accountability to Congress, but yet the taxpayers ended up having to pay for that. This idea that you can just break the rules when it suits you, and at other times hold everyone accountable to the rules because they're so precious. This is as bad as it gets. I just don't think it can really get much worse than it is.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of the waiving of the ECP charges during the January 2021 mania, when people wouldn't have been able to cover due to extreme cover their deposit requirements to the NSCC. And therefore, the NSCC just decided that those deposit requirements were sort of not as necessary as they maybe had been considered to be.
We'll just waive it for now, and it allows them to pick winners and losers. We'll waive for you, but not for you.
Yeah.
So we didn't waive for all these people who needed waivers, in the 5 years leading up to this or 10 years leading up, we can't waive it for them, but we'll waive it for you because this is such an extraordinary circumstance. And that's what happened in '08 was that the government picked the winners and the losers, who they would bail out and who they wouldn't. Why did Lehman fold and not Merrill Lynch, for example? So they're picking winners and losers, but yet standing by the almighty market will make the decision. It's their market-based discipline, and it's as if they don't hear themselves saying this. They're saying into themselves. They're saying, and they're telling us, "Oh, the market is market discipline. The market will take care of it." This is what Gensler told the EU roundtable on T+1. We have a set of policies and procedures and market discipline and all that works, and we don't have to step in and do anything else until we have to step in and do something else, right? So everything works until it doesn't work, and all of a sudden we get to decide that it's time to change the rules.
Yeah, I was just trying to find the bit in 2008, and there was a financial firm that you'd mentioned, but I cannot find the bit that I've highlighted because there's a lot of notes I have on the book. And essentially,
reading it, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, it makes my blood boil, but it's fantastic.
I will say one thing about that while you're looking for that name. One thing about that, this does like most of the stuff I write. This will also really get your blood, will raise your blood pressure, but the advantage of this book is that it's written in, someone called it 8 friendly, but it's written in because the articles there was a certain length that the editor wanted from me for each of them. So you can take it in pieces. You can read one article and then stop. I have friends of mine who are reading it. They said I read a couple of pages and I'm like, whoa, okay, I got to go for a walk. I can't stay with it. But you don't have to because it's written in a style and in chunks, like smaller chunks, so it's easier to digest that way.
Yeah, and actually, it was a firm. Yeah. They were. It was basically they were involved in like small to medium sized businesses and loans to like 300,000 to like 1 million different like small medium sized businesses, and the Fed basically decided that they weren't worthy of their help like days after agreeing to the AIG bailout. I can't remember who it was. I can't find the bit, but
it's not coming to mind right away.
It was a while ago, obviously.
Well, obviously, but I did, as you said. I mean, I wrote these articles between like '08 and 2015 while I was working on Lessons Not Learned. In fact, so some of Lessons Not Learned kind of leaks in here, although that's much more technical. But then, in order to prepare this book, I went back and reread everything, and where I could, put in updates in the footnotes, put in updates, new links, those sort of things. I'm trying to think.
Basically, it's just underlying the point that they were picking the winners and losers, and I think I found another thing that quite illustrates that. It says that basically the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress were calling the TARP bailouts a bait and switch. Calling it an ongoing fraud and deception on the American people. I believe that was Dennis. How do I pronounce that? Kucinich, maybe.
Kucinich, yes. Yeah. He ran for president once, I think.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. But anyway, you point out that like it says there should be no surprise that only 320,000 homeowners were helped instead of the 4 million that were promised. And I think it's really. The thing that gets me the most about the entire book is to watch the Fed pick winners and losers in this sense, and it makes me wonder how on earth nobody went to jail.
Yeah, and that's really there's one article in there titled "This perp walk needs handcuffs." It's when all of the bank and investment bank heads of all of them went to Washington, sat in front of Congress to answer questions. But they were all friends with these Congress people because they had donated to their campaigns and had been having other meetings with them. It is shocking to see, but it's not, it's the sad part about it is that it just wasn't unusual in the U.S. That's basically how so much of that bailouts and who gets taken care of and who doesn't. Like there are some industries you can look at and you can say, okay, I see why a government would want to support this industry. For example, automobiles, because GM doesn't just make trucks and cars, they make tanks and jeeps and armored personnel carriers. And so they do make, there is military equipment that they're making. Same thing with airlines, because the airlines buy the planes that come from Boeing, unfortunately, and Northrop Grumman and a few others. But those, they don't just build commercial airplanes for passenger travel. They build jets and they build parts for space equipment. So there are some industries where you can see, okay, I kind of get why the government would want to do that. But unfortunately, the oversight that we see, the lack of oversight that we see in the financial services is just as bad in those others. It's just as bad in airlines. It's like why we let Boeing basically regulate themselves. Just like Goldman Sachs had someone from the, or JP Morgan or whatever bank you want to pick, had someone from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, their examiner, had an office in their building and went to lunch with them and was on their softball team and for all intents and purposes was an employee of that bank and yet was there to enforce regulations. So the same thing was happening at Boeing, where the FAA had someone who's supposed to be enforcing regulations, doing oversight, doing regulation, minding the regulations. They had an office at Boeing. They went to lunch with everybody. They were on the softball team with them. So they've completely lost this idea of having, an objective eye to watch over that industry. And I point that out only to emphasize that financial services is not unique in the sense of being too friendly with the regulators. Although in financial services, it's harder to justify why you would want to protect that industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I read a great book a couple of years ago called Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed.
I haven't seen it.
It's really interesting because it talks about, it begins with like the contrast between like how hospitals deal with crises and incidents that have led to someone's like death. If there seems to be like errors and generally in the medical industry, there's a lot of like, there's a rush to not blame the doctors basically, because then all the doctors will get forever sued and lose their jobs and we'll have no doctors left basically, or they'll be, financially destroyed. And that the book was trying to point out that you shouldn't be doing that. You should, maybe not sue them, but at least like open the case up and be like, right, okay, what went wrong? How can we avoid this happening in the future? And he points to the airline industry as an industry that in history had been incredibly good whenever there was like an airline disaster. So like when I can't remember what it was, when the two planes hit each other over the States and there was like a big monstrous investigation.
Yes, I remember. I don't remember the airlines, but I remember it happening.
Yeah, and so they because it's a literal crash, not economically, but an actual crash, and people lose their lives, that they spend months and years like drilling through it and being like, okay, how can we prevent this disaster happening again? And clearly what's happened is they've become complacent somewhat in this area. But it amazes me that then the financial industry, given that it's also a crash, slightly different, but it has an impact that's way beyond the 300 lives that get lost in an airplane crash. That it's 300 million lives, and yet the same amount of accountability isn't applied at all, like in Congress, in the media, in the regulatory agencies. Like no one was sitting around saying, how do we avoid 2008? No one asked that question after it happened.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. And that's a good comparison, black box thinking, because the black box records everything that happened, all the mechanics. It doesn't tell you the mindset of the pilots and the people in charge, but it does at least give you this factual information about what was happening there. And knowing that you have that, maybe you can sit back a little bit on your regulation, but you want safety, but you have to have accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what was missing in financial services, because all of the things that happened in 2008 had happened before. It was not a black swan event in the sense of, it was a black swan only in the sense that if all your life you've never been to a zoo, you've never been to Australia, you've never been to a public park. I don't know, the UK's got plenty of black swans because they're native to Australia, but once people went to Australia, they took them back for the gardens all over Europe. And so black swans are sort of everywhere. They're really not that rare. So you can say that this set of circumstances is so unique, it requires something very special. But the reality is that it's just not. But if you have, as you just pointed out, not done the forensic work after the last crisis to figure out exactly what happened, then you're not going to be able to prevent the next one from happening. Pretty much around the world now, we have these self-regulatory organizations. So the key word in financial regulation is self-regulatory. And I'm doing some research on this now. I've been working on it for a couple of years and reading a lot of background papers. Most of it's in law and not in finance, as to why self-regulation is there and how it has failed as an experiment, because that's basically what it's been. It hasn't been around forever, but as long as it's been around, it's really just been an experiment in self-regulation in financial services. So the justification for doing it is, one reason is that the people in that industry should know, they have the knowledge about planes, for example, and airlines, or they have the knowledge on Wall Street of how credit default swaps work and how mortgage bond obligations work, and they have the knowledge that we as regulators in Washington don't have the time to gather for ourselves, and so we'll let them, write their regulations, and then we do oversight and review and that sort of thing, put in some accountability. But the reality is that, and you may have read this section already, when the heads of the banks, the Purple Act, went to Washington, they admitted, the head of Citibank admitted he did not understand credit default swaps. The people who were, he was in charge of probably the largest or one of the largest global financial organizations, and he did not understand a credit default swap, and yet they were just crashing markets everywhere with it. And he was just like, gee, I didn't know the gun was loaded. I mean, how could you be in charge of that and not know? Because the whole concept of self-regulation in financial markets is based on the idea that those people in charge of those banks and brokers are supposed to know all of this, right? And supposed to understand it. And they did not. They simply didn't understand what they were doing.
Yeah, that bit made me particularly mad. Because obviously, there's an extent to which a CEO can't be expected to know everything about what a business is doing, especially when you get to a certain size. There's just only a certain amount that a CEO can be an expert in, and they're not hired to be so you say it's a software company. The CEO is not hired to be a technical expert on the code that they use to do one tiny piece of the bit of software that they design. That's not what he's there for. He's there to
But he should be. But he is and should be and is in charge of making sure that there's someone on the payroll who's watching the people who are writing the code, that understands what code they're using, what the risks are, what the rewards are, that those things are balanced. And that's all about staffing. And staffing is a primary function of management. So if you're a CEO, you're right. The head of Goldman Sachs does not need to understand which button to push on a keyboard to make a trade happen, right, from a client, or probably doesn't have to know how to, put up the Herman Miller, office frames, that people sit behind in those things. They have to know that. That's fine. They have maintenance for that. They have computer software for that. But he should know that, in fact, they're using Herman Miller office equipment
Yeah.
because the cost associated with it. He should know, in the sense of knowing that he's hired someone to be in charge of that.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And so you mentioned a phrase there just a little bit back, safety with accountability, which is the title of the chapter of Lessons Not Learned that you sent me that you wanted
Right.
to discuss. So that seems very apt and appropriate.
Yeah,
So I'm just going
there was a table in there, I think, that lists all of the bailouts that have been done in the U.S., all of the industries. I think I went back to the 70s. I'm sure we could go back further, but I only went back to the 70s, right, to find.
Starting with Penn Central Railroad in 1970 of 3.2 billion. So
right.
Yeah, this is on screen for people who are watching. I can bring it up for you if you'd like.
I mean, I don't need to see it. I'm disgusted with it. It just brings back bad memories because I lived through all of this, and even through, not just through the most recent financial crisis, but I came out of I was in college in the 70s and studying business and finance when all that was going on. So I'm sort of watching it happen. But the point being that if any industry of any size fails, right, has bankruptcies, has some sort of systemic problems, and every time that happens, the federal government steps in and pays for the injuries, whatever's done, makes good on all their loans, makes sure that they have enough money to keep operating, sometimes takes an ownership position like they did in AIG, which is also not something that the government's supposed to be involved in.
At least not in America.
Well, yeah, at least not in America. You're right. There are countries where this is more common, but here it's just not. It's not part of the way this capitalist democracy is supposed to work. The government can take ownership positions in industries. They can privatize. They can, take over, whatever they want to do. But they can't do that. And out of the other side of their mouth say that, we're a market-based economy. We have market discipline, and the market will take care of it. And you can't do both. You either take government ownership or you let the market handle it. But you can't let the market handle it until the businesses and the banks and the brokers and the railroads and the whatevers, they're in trouble, and then you jump in and fix it. Because what happens, the problem then becomes, I do want some safety. I don't want, as I said, you don't want General Motors to go out of business because they provide equipment for our military. It's something very important. Yeah. So you really don't want them to totally fail. But if all manufacturing firms believe that they will also get a bailout, because why wouldn't I get one? Because he got one. Then they have no reason to be careful about risk. They don't have to. They don't have. The CEO of Citibank doesn't have to worry if he's got someone on board who's watching new products. Who's the head of new product development, and who's the head of marketing that's going to start selling credit default swaps without knowing what the heck they are and how they work? Like, that's my job as a manager, as an executive manager. A big part of my job is staffing. I have to make sure that there's someone on board who does that. So I have no incentive to do that as long as I know the government's standing by to bail me out.
Yeah, I think that's it encourages them to just not do their job, and you talk about this like halfway house, and in a sense we have that with a lot of public services in the United Kingdom, where things that have been traditionally run by a government sponsored body, like a non-governmental, like government funded thing, so like the NHS, the National Health Service that we had, we still have, but we're slowly sliding into this position where it's government money being paid to private corporations to provide the services on behalf of the government. So we get the thing where we're paying government money, so taxpayer money, to a company to do it. The government aren't providing the service, or the government body isn't providing the service, so they don't like take accountability for how bad it is. They're like, oh well, it's it's this private company that we're doing, and then you can go to the private company, you go, oh, this service is below standard, and they go, oh well, when the government's paying us to provide this service, so take it up with them. So there's zero accountability. So you have to have, like you said, one or the other in this senses.
That's right. So I think when NHS started, it was actually the government was providing the services. Like they hired
everything.
They sort of ran the hospitals and all that. And as you said, sliding now into this other form, which is kind of close to what we have, which is with Medicare, and you have to be 65 or disabled to get benefits from there. But basically, I get services. Anyone who's on Medicare gets services from private providers, who then bill the federal or state government to get reimbursed. And we have all sorts of problems where people are, I mean, there was just a couple in Arizona who, like tens of millions of dollars billed Medicare for tens of millions of dollars worth of services that they never provided. There's a group that says they're providing drug rehabilitation and mental health services for Native Americans from the reservations, and they're not providing them with any services. They just get them to fill out a form with their name, social security number, and signature, and then they bill the government for the money. Wow. So that is fraught with problems. I mean, I don't know, it's hard because I'm not really a big fan of having government run everything. Like, I'm not a big government type person, but on the other hand, someone has to be in charge, number one. So whether it's self-regulated or government regulated, somebody has to be in charge. Yes, I do want a safety net for medical, as you talked about. Do you sue the doctors, or do you sue and they tell you to go? No, sue the government because they paid us. Like, I want some safety for the users of those services, but I need accountability. I need to know that when things go wrong, someone is held accountable for it. And in this whole decade of Armageddon, the entire 2008 financial crisis, and the many crises before that, no one has been held accountable. Some lowly fish somewhere will be, goldfish will be pulled out of the pond and, flushed down the toilet, into some federal penitentiary of some sort. But there's just really no one saying, look, these are the people who should have, as I said, if you're the head of a global financial institution, you have an obligation to make sure that even if you don't understand a credit default swap, that before you start selling them, someone knows what they are, what the risks are, and has explained it to auditing, accounting, somewhere up the line, that you just don't start offering new products. And I'll bet you that guy knows exactly how people open bank accounts and brokerage accounts and check clearing and credit cards. I'm sure he knows how all that other stuff works. So why is he ignoring this one piece and letting it become such an enormous part? Like, the risk that was built up there was just an insane amount of risk. Risk that, it was the financial institution was better off not taking payments from borrowers, because they had sold so many swaps that they could make 9 times as much if you defaulted on your payments.
Wow, that's the next level of just madness.
That should never have been allowed to happen. And as far as I know, the only national leader who attempted to do anything to correct that was Angela Merkel in Germany. And she set out to with a statement that they would prohibit the purchase of a credit derivative to anyone who did not have an economic interest in the underlying asset. So if you own the bond, yes, you should be able to buy credit protection through a credit default swap. If you don't own the bond, you should not be able to buy it. And even if you own the bond, you shouldn't be able to buy 10 times as much, right? Like, if my house is worth $1 million, don't sell me $10 million worth of insurance on it, because the incentive to burn it down is just way too high.
Yeah, it's quite like that scene in The Big Short where I can't remember the name of the guy, Ryan Gosling's character, and he's like, you're standing in front of a burning house and I'm offering you fire insurance on the house. Yeah,
as it's burning down. There you go. Yeah, that's even better.
and you talked about accountability in some sense, and I just wanted to show people this. I'm pulling it up for people to look at that are watching. Is this chart about members of Congress donations, whether they've based on whether they voted yes or no on the financial bailout, and it looks like some of them have been held accountable by their donors for failing
Oh, yeah.
to back the bailouts. So for all House members,
I
people
think those were contributions they received before the vote.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if you got money from Wall Street, you voted yes on the bailout. And if
Yeah.
you did get money from Wall Street, you voted no.
Yeah,
Kind of the way.
Yeah, and I think you point out in the book as well that despite it being, people saying, "Oh, Obama only bailed them out because he got loads of money from Wall Street," that the difference between what he got and what Senator McCain got in 2008 during the run was like a couple of $1 million, which just
it's like negligible.
Yeah, it doesn't. So that they're buying.
I think I looked up the cost of running an ad in Iowa or something, a newspaper or TV ad or something. It's like you could run like one extra 30-second spot for the difference in the money that one got over the other. And I'll tell you this, I haven't looked at every sort of Wall Street firm and their leaders and how much they contribute, but because I'd worked at Milken Institute, I did look at Mike Milken's giving. He kind of gave the same amount to Republicans as to Democrats. So he was kind of greasing the wheel both ways. Like he just, and in a sense, I see that also in Warren Buffett's political donations. He tends to give to both parties, just in case, like whoever's in power, I want to make sure that I'm friends with them. They tend not to favor one or the other going into it.
Anyway, we are close to having spoke for an hour, so I'm gonna let you go, and I am gonna have some dinner. But everybody, definitely go check out A Decade of Armageddon. Where's my camera? There it is.
But you're on your blurry side.
Ah, yes.
You have your background blurred, so there.
I'm flipped on the one that's recording. Don't worry.
Okay. Sorry.
So yeah, Decade of Armageddon. Check out Naked, Short, and Greedy. I don't know which bookshelf it's on, somewhere.
Well, I did want to mention the Decade of Armageddon. There are still left some hardback copies. The hardback copies are limited to 100. We only printed 100 of those. They are each one will be signed, and they are $5 from the sale of every hardback copy will go to the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, and we did that with Naked, Short, and Greedy for a while, so that was kind of fun too. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, there is currently hardbacks available. We can even order them to the UK. Interesting. Well, I have my copy. Maybe I'll do that for less.
Well,
it's not there.
My publisher's in London. That's why you can get them in the UK.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Spiramus Press, they're in London. Oh. And the hardback is only available through Spiramus. You can't get that through the other booksellers.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll put the link for Spiramus in the description. And yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah. Always a pleasure to talk with you. I know I said 30 minutes, and here we are at an hour. But I do enjoy talking with you, and I've watched your other episodes on different topics. I really enjoy watching your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I try to cover lots of stuff that I find interesting. Just because I can, basically. No one's telling me what to cover.
There you go. That's a great thing about being independent.
True. And it was Bill Clinton that repealed Glass-Steagall in November 1999. For reference for people, because I looked it up there earlier. But yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey, listeners, real quick. Do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out, and you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.